YouTube. Welcome back. Long-term subscribers are going to know what day this is. 364 days of the year, the only Ferrari you're going to find in the Northern Rivers is a tractor. But on the day of the Italian Friendship Festival, Lisamore, the Brisbane Ferrari Club brings a whole bunch of Ferraris down to help celebrate the event and set a theme for the day. And my gosh, these are beautiful machines. You can't tow a slasher behind them, but they're beautiful anyway. Of course, if you prefer 2 wheels to 4, there's a display of Ducati motorcycles, and there's a beautiful vintage one in yellow right there. But look at this Moto Guzzi. I don't think I've seen one of these since the 80s. When did you last see one? Anyway, great display. Owners are here standing by, so you can't really sit on them or anything like that, but great feast for the eyes. Look at that. So it's back on Nutkin Farm, and definitely less festive around here, although, you know, there's some things going on. Walking next to my driveway, this is where most of my 344s are located, and I don't know whether I can call this pre-season flowering, but there's a mixture here of flowers that are about to open and a lot of new racemes that are probably set to open when they're meant to, which is actually quite positive. Looking at this, there's you know, if these flowers actually open, it'll be a better flowering year than the 344s have had in a couple of years. But, you know, there's flowers at all stages of development, including some that are recently dead and some that are white, fully open and accepting bees. So, you know, what we make out of that for next season, I don't know. But I've recorded this video as a sort of a follow-up to a couple of ones I've done lately where we've talked about what's gone wrong with the 2025 season. I'm looking more ahead now to the 2026 season and what we might be able to do to avoid a repeat of that. And that's fairly important. We certainly don't want the bad weather conditions of 2025 to impact the season in 2026 as well, because that'd be 2 seasons down for the price of 1, and that would look rather careless, wouldn't it? My gosh, little racemes everywhere. What have I done to deserve that? Anyway, look, I touched on what we might do for 2026 when I did a video about whether or not, you know, it was time to feed the macadamias in winter, as opposed to, you know, what most of the industry seems to do, and that is, you know, wait till the harvesting is all over in about August and then laying down tons and tons of manure and mulch. My theory was the trees probably did need food, but, you know, and that my view at the time was you probably lay down some chemical fertiliser that included some trace elements, including boron. Not a recommendation I'd normally make. I'm a big fan of organic feeding myself. But to run that by someone whose views I trust, Peter Fraser, he's next door to me. He's been awarded prizes by the Australian Macadamia Society for having the most consistent crop 5 years running. I don't know if he'll win that this year. He says his crop was 30% down, but that's actually mild compared to a lot of New South Wales farmers. He attributes that to spraying his flowers with Merivon before the rains came last season. He was lucky. He got a fungicide spray in on the flowers. It appeared to provide some protection, although he doesn't claim complete protection by any means. He attributes the bad season, by the way, to the short flowering period, the fact that pollinators really couldn't get around and pollinate all the nuts, and that a lot of the smaller nuts that we did get were probably self-pollinated nuts, which research tells us are always smaller than the full thing. He wasn't so much a devotee of the theory that the trees got less sun and therefore the nuts were smaller from less solar energy. That's still a theory I cling to, though. Anyway, getting off topic. I put to him the question saying, well, look, what do you think about the idea of trees needing food now? And he agreed. He said, absolutely. You said these trees have had nutrients leached out of the soil. We haven't had much in the way of a chance to feed. And of course, with his out-of-season flower, stripping nutrients out of the trees and out of the soil, we need something to boost them up in advance of the proper flowering period. And I said, well, what are you doing? I said, are you going to feed manure early, or are you going to feed chemical? And he knocked me over backwards, because Peter's been an organic feeder for as long as he can remember. And this year he's doing something different. What he's doing is foliar feeding. And I nearly dropped the phone. I said, why are you doing that? His view is that with the soil so wet for such a long period, the soil biology has become waterlogged. That's not good, because these little microorganisms that turn manure into nutrients for our trees all need air. And when you soak the soil and it stays soaked, these microbes and bacteria can get drowned out, numbers can go down, but most importantly, they're not going to do the job you want them to do, and that is convert things like chook manure into nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus for these trees to eat. So he knows, and he agrees with me, that there's a priority to get nutrients into the tree right now. And he actually went and proved that by getting leaf testing. No point getting soil testing this time around because of the soil biology. He went and got leaf testing to see what it was the trees had in their leaves and what they needed in order to get ready for the flowering season. And what he discovered was a lack in his farm of calcium and boron. Now, that's not going to be the same in every farm, but it is true that boron leaches very easily from extended rainy events, like the one we had in March. And boron's also very important for flowering, not only the tree's decision to flower, but the effectiveness of the pollen tubes, which of course is going to mean pollination results in a nut for you. And all these little baby racemes here benefit from a little bit of boron in the soil, and a deficiency of it can really punish you. So why foliar feeding? Well, you bypass the soil biology, is the simple answer. And what you do with that is you spray nutrients into the tree where they are taken up by the leaves. And in particular, and this is the case with most plants, they get absorbed through the back of the leaves. Much less shiny, much less waxy. They've got stomates and things underneath the back of the leaves, and they can absorb nutrients, most nutrients in fact, from foliar feeding. And the way a macadamia farmer does that is the same way you apply pesticide sprays. You spray up into the tree from the ground, push the nutrients all on the back of the leaves. You don't do it in rainy weather, obviously, but you can do it in weather that's potentially about to rain, just so long as you get the underside of the leaves and give them a good coating. It doesn't have to be as thorough as insecticide spraying because you're not after pests, but you've got to get a lot of the leaves in order to make it effective. And in that way, absorbing nutrients through the leaf and not the root, you can give the tree, I'm tempted to call it a sugar hit of nutrients that it can then use. We already, a lot of farmers already do something like this when we spray our first pesticide, and usually in about August, because the early sprays we do of things like Transform can be combined with, I think there's one called BZ3T or BZ3 something or other, or Budmate. There's a few other brands that contain boron then, and by adding boron to the spray mix, then it does provide a bit of a benefit to the tree. The tree doesn't need very much boron, so it's the sort of thing that you can apply in a foliar way and possibly meet the tree's needs for the season. The reason Peter doesn't want to wait until that particular spray is because the trees have flowered out of season and they need more boron now. And so why not do that spray at an earlier time? Don't need to put pesticide in it. Although interestingly, Peter has had so much pre-season flowering that he's considered it worthwhile doing a pesticide round just to get lacebug numbers down, because otherwise lacebug during flowering this year is going to be a real issue. All this out of season flowering will have built up the lacebug population, and without breaking the cycle, obviously the real flowering, the one you get your nuts from, the one where the money comes from, isn't going to work for you very well unless you spray, of course, very heavily during the flowering season, and that can affect pollinators, which are very, very precious little insects, any kind of bee or moth or anything else. Don't want to be killing those. So foliar feeding, why don't we do more of it? Cost is the main reason. When you look at putting foliar food on macadamia trees, the biggest issue is that you're not really applying very much. You're putting in a certain amount of product that gets put in a 2,000 litre tank, gets diluted all the way down, sprayed through the tree. You're only really going to get trace amounts of the nutrient into the actual leaves. So it's good for boron, for example, because a tree doesn't need very much boron. But if you're talking about nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, things that a tree needs in gross amounts, that's where you start getting an issue. And you can't really give the tree all the nutrients it needs through that method, at least through the leaves. Interestingly, my neighbour, who owns the farm to my right, has been experimenting with feeding his trees power feed, which is largely a fish emulsion fertiliser. It's not bad on NPK, it's not terribly good on trace elements, and he uses a more concentrated version of power feed than the kind you're going to find in your local Bunnings. There are commercial formulations of it. There's also some really interesting commercial formulations that combine power feed and sea salt and fulvic acid, or humic acid, I forget which of the two. And that is a very nice little cocktail from the makers of sea salt that could be very effective on macadamias. Now, that's worked out reasonably cost effective, but I don't know how cost effective in terms of, you do need to drive your tractor around. You do need to feed fairly often. Definitely not a once a year job. And the people who are trying to save money at the moment by doing a single feed of bulk manure and mulch, the input costs are definitely, changed when you have to do your feed several times as a foliar spray. But, something worth considering, particularly if the soil is repeatedly wet. There are also companies that do advocate foliar feeding as a base kind of feed. Nutritech Solutions are still around. They still have a lot of solutions that they advocate for macadamia growers if they'll listen. I haven't looked at the pricing per hectare. I don't believe it's competitive, but as a short-term measure, they're around. You might want to look at the products they offer. They do a kelp product, they do NPK. I don't know that they specifically do a boron product, but there's plenty of boron sprays out there, and ones that are specifically aimed at flowering, which to me might make a lot of sense, particularly if you've had a lot of pre-season flowering. But it's a controversial topic again, you know. It's a lot of diesel, a lot of, you know, people need to maintain their spray equipment. And when you use your spray equipment, it really does chew up the juice a fair bit. And, you know, it's not that diesel's overly expensive at the moment, but going all over your farm many, many times, you'll notice the difference in your bottom line for diesel expenses compared to anything else. And when you realise you're not putting down a hell of a lot of nutrient in bulk terms, you'd have to wonder whether it's all worth it. So guys, what do you think about foliar feeding? Is it worth another look, either generally or specifically for where we're at in winter 2025, where the soil's really a little bit wet still, and you might not be sure that something like a chemical feed would get through to the roots effectively in time for flowering? It's only a month away, so it'll be kind of now or never when you're making decisions like this, and it would just be a really interesting discussion to have in the comments below. It would be interesting to see what the irrigating farms do, because their irrigation, generally speaking, doesn't provide a foliar feed. Generally speaking, there's drippers that might throw a bit of moisture sideways, but not necessarily up into the tops of the trees. In fact, usually nowhere close to it. They might have a liquid feed that they want to provide, but what do they think about whether it'll actually get through to the soil? Food for thought there. And then if you're on the flats, if you're on the sugarcane flats and there's water still in your water channels, you know, you're nowhere near drying out just yet, what's your view? Would you do a foliar feed, given that it involves putting extra moisture on an already moist pitch? Inevitably it does. I mean, you spray stuff into the tree, but it does land on the ground afterwards. And you definitely wouldn't want to get bogged or anything. So that's a consideration. I'll finish this video now overlooking the Nightcap Ranges and block 1 of my farm, which, you know, despite everything, is reasonably healthy. And I'm going to show you, because I can't show you any macadamias, I'm going to show you what did do well on my farm this year, and that was citrus. We've got mandarins here, we've got a couple of lime trees, and this is where I learned that limes are yellow when ripe, just like lemons. Washington navel, and a good old-fashioned lemon tree that is absolutely full of fruit. If only I could farm nuts like this. All right, guys, over to you. Let me know. Make us richer with your observations, and I will find you and talk to you soon. Bye for now.